Okay, looks like we have a lot of on time, eager folks for this webinar. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time zone you're in, where you're joining us from. We had quite a few folks from different areas register for this webinar, so thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and get started out of respect for everyone who's here on time. Let me share my screen and walk through a little bit of housekeeping and introduction. So this is a live webinar. However, we have a lot of folks, and so it's going to be a one-way webinar. We can interact through the Q&A panel. So somewhere in your Zoom, either web app or if you're using the downloaded version, there should be a panel where you can click Q&A and you can send me questions either publicly or privately. And I'll do my best to address those at the end of the webinar. A little bit about myself. My name is Rich Mendes. I'm the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Bytemethod.ai. We are a subsidiary of Dexian, one of the top 10 IT staffing firms. I'll talk a little bit about the company in a moment. I have been in the AI space for the past 6 years or so, joined Dexian through an acquisition of an AI startup. I've spent most of my career working in enterprise software companies, typically venture-backed, and then doing exits. You can see some of the companies I've worked for here in the slide. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about how we have built a digital worker, an AI-powered digital worker that we are using at Dexian and Bytemethod to help our customers maximize and get the most out of their ServiceNow investment. And so we're going to be going through an overview of that digital worker, kind of what was the impetus behind it, why we built it, what areas we're focusing on, and kind of, how it helps solve some of the challenges that we're seeing in the market. We're going to go in and show live demos. Hopefully, with the demo gods, everything will work out well. And I'll kind of walk through a couple of use cases and specific areas where we're significantly shrinking the time it takes to perform some common ServiceNow tasks. We'll get into the architecture. I'll show you a sneak peek kind of behind the scenes. You can address any security concerns, as there always are with AI projects. And then we'll talk about next steps and open it up for Q&A. So once again, for those who are joining, if you use the Q&A panel as we go along, you can submit your questions, and I'll do my best to answer it at the end of the webinar. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. A little bit about Dexian. That's our parent organization. We're one of the top 10 IT staffing and services firms. We have about 220 of the Fortune 500 as customers and many more beyond that. We have about 11,000 employees located at about 70 offices around the world. I am based in McLean, Virginia, not too far from our headquarters. Dexian also, about a year ago, decided to acquire a couple of AI companies and provide their customers with the ability to leverage agentic AI and other modern emerging AI technologies to help improve their operational efficiency within their organizations. When we started this subsidiary Bytemethod, we also approached Dexian's ServiceNow practice, very capable organization that has implemented dozens of ServiceNow implementations or instances across many different customers in different industries. And we approached the organization and said, hey, what are areas where you're finding customers have challenges, bottlenecks, and other challenges kind of implementing ServiceNow, right? What tends to increase costs and so on and so forth. And with those discussions, what we found in speaking with both our consultants and many of our customers and prospects is a common set of challenges. And hopefully this resonates with all of you as you think about kind of your experience with ServiceNow. First of all, if you are doing a new implementation of a module, the typical statistic in the market is it usually costs about anywhere from 2 to 3 times the license cost to set up and implement that module. And so if you're a large organization and you're implementing some pretty significant modules within ServiceNow, that can add up very, very quickly. And even more important than the cost, even if you're able to afford the cost, in terms of kind of getting time to value and return on investment, it tends to prolong it. The other challenge we hear from customers is it's difficult and expensive to hire good ServiceNow consultants. And once you find them, it takes time to ramp them up on your existing environment and internal processes. And ultimately, if they leave the organization, a lot of the institutional knowledge of the work they've done within your ServiceNow instance leaves with them. And so that's, a constant challenge with resources. And finally, of course, after implementing a module, it doesn't mean that the work ends there. There's constant ongoing maintenance, development and testing. ServiceNow is releasing great new capabilities all the time. Sometimes you need to migrate or take advantage of those. So it's a non-trivial amount of time spent. And if we're being honest, most people who have ServiceNow organizations are not getting a lot of budget to do more work. They have to do a lot more work with the same people that they have. And so against this backdrop, we worked with our consultants who've implemented ServiceNow across many of our customers, and also spoke with folks both at ServiceNow and within our customer base. And we started identifying areas that are not necessarily complex. I mean, some of them are, but even if they're not complex, they happen often enough that they consume over time, over weeks and months and so forth, a fair amount of bandwidth of what are, highly skilled and experienced ServiceNow consultants. So areas include things like catalog items where it might take anywhere from, 4 to 8 hours to kind of implement a moderate complexity catalog item. Or if you're, trying to create high quality knowledge management KB articles, analyzing your existing documentation and being able to map it to templates and build and keep up to date high quality KB articles takes time. There's often a lot of analysis that needs to be done of incidents and ticket trends. And sure, you can go ahead and build custom reports, but again, that's very time consuming and often kind of static in terms of the information you're given. Reports don't take actions for you, and so there's limitations there. We've heard very interestingly, for example, analyzing user roles to figure out, your license distribution and whether you're optimizing your license across your user base gets challenging in large organizations. And finally, last but certainly not least, I think every customer has lamented, some of the challenges they have keeping their CMDB up to date and managing things like, duplicates and stale records and things like that. So these are a few areas that have come up. And we're cognizant that ServiceNow themselves are investing in solutions like Now Assist and other AI capabilities to help with some of these areas. So we want to make sure that if we build a digital worker, it's complementary to what ServiceNow is already offering. Okay. So with that backdrop, we've developed a digital worker that has some, kind of interesting capabilities. First of all, one of the things we want to make sure of is that this digital worker is a true companion to folks in your organization. So if you were to hire a human that comes into your ServiceNow organization and helps with development around ServiceNow, the typical process is they would first try and understand, what your environment is, what version you're on, what configuration changes you've made to the environment, what is your requirements gathering formats, right? Who are the business owners? How do you capture and define requirements? Do you do it in spreadsheets, in Jira? Kind of what's the typical process? And we want to make sure that we can similarly onboard this digital worker, just like you would a human, to understand all of these kind of company-specific requirements, formats, and processes, and naming conventions, and best practices so that it understands how you like to do things with ServiceNow. Okay. The second important thing is we're not necessarily creating this digital worker to replace a human, right? It's not never going to have the best judgment and taste and all those things that you have as a human. And so we want to make sure that whatever work it does always facilitates what we're calling a human in the loop to ensure that it gets confirmation from you. It can, implement requirements, author content, analyze data, but it's conversational. It gets permissions from you. It honors role-based access control and all of those things. And finally, as I mentioned, it complements Now Assist, but does not require it, right? So we have customers that have purchased Now Assist. And in some cases, they want to, use those assists for certain areas within ServiceNow or certain end user support. We want them to be able to leverage the digital worker to do other things in other areas if they don't want to consume assists. But if they're okay with it, we'll have the digital worker consume those assists and do things even faster. Okay, so we want the idea is to give you options, help you leverage and maximize your investment in ServiceNow as much as possible. Okay, so with that backdrop, let's take a look at some specific examples. Okay, the first one that has come up a lot when we initially approached our own consultants and said, hey, where do you spend a lot of time, both in terms of greenfield implementations as well as existing, maintenance? One of the areas that came up is catalog item development, right? So especially in larger organizations, you may have hundreds, or in some cases, I've heard even thousands of catalog items, and you're constantly kind of, sunsetting, updating, replacing, creating new ones. And most companies tend to capture those catalog item requirements in their own format. Invariably, we've seen variants of a spreadsheet, which I'll show you in a moment. That's what our own consultants use. But these formats are typically proprietary and unique to everyone. So a typical process that humans would go through here after they've worked with the business, users to capture the requirements is they'll take a look and see, okay, how do I interpret this? What's the workflow rules I have to set up, the variable sets, approval workflows, so on and so forth. Then they'd have to go into ServiceNow and create those variables in form fields. They'd have to build out the workflow in Flow Designer with all the corresponding tasks. They'd have to create any potential scripts and conditional logic to enforce access restrictions. And then finally, of course, they'll have to create any, SLA definitions for fulfillment. And, again, this varies depending on the complexity, but what we've heard is on average, it could take anywhere from, 4 to 8 hours to set this up properly for a moderate complexity catalog. In some cases, it could take several days to build and test this out. So let's take a look at how we do this in the digital worker. So I'm switching over to my browser. Hopefully everyone can see this here. We have started developing the digital worker running outside of ServiceNow in a browser environment like this, and I'll talk about a little bit later why we chose that option. However, we are a build partner of ServiceNow, and we're also looking at how to expose this capability natively within ServiceNow. This might entail exposing some of these digital worker capabilities as skills that you can call from Now Assist. Or it could be that we build a scoped application that you can run natively within ServiceNow. So we're exploring those options. But for now, we've built this to run as a web application. And here you can see I'm connected to a series of different ServiceNow instances. The first thing you'll do is you'll come in and you'll connect to one of your ServiceNow instances. You'll provide your credentials. We use OAuth 2.1 in three-legged mode. So that just means that it preserves any role-based access control. Once you connect using your username and information, you only have access to do with the digital worker what you're allowed to do in ServiceNow if you logged in directly. Okay, so we preserve all of those permissions. We've designed this user interface to look familiar if you've been using any large language models like ChatGPT or others. So you can see here on the left is a list of, a historical, set of chats that I've used. And on the bottom here, I can start asking the digital worker to do some work. But to make this more easy and straightforward, in the middle, we have listed common areas and tasks that that the digital worker can help with, including things like catalog items. So to get started, I'm going to show you an example in this area. And I want to start by showing you the format that we use internally within Dexian to capture catalog item requirements when our consultants are working with business users at customers. So our format looks something like this, where we have some metadata about this particular request. We have a list of all of the fields and variables that go into the form. We have information about some workflow details and sequences and steps. And so this is a, I would say, simple to medium level complexity catalog item. They can get much more sophisticated than this. But invariably, when we've talked to customers who use ServiceNow, they all have their own sort of format like this, whether it's in a spreadsheet, a Word document, or other type of area. They capture their requirements in some sort of format like this. Now, I can't normally give this to Now Assist and have it do it, right? That Now Assist doesn't solve what we call the first mile problem of helping to understand and interpret your requirements in your specific format. So within the digital worker, I can come in here and attach or upload this spreadsheet and go ahead and have the digital worker look at it. And because this digital worker has been onboarded to understand your requirements formats that you use, you can see here on the right, it has actually validated that this spreadsheet is correct and has all the appropriate fields. And it's asking me for permission. So here's an example of human in the loop to go ahead and, execute this import, like actually run it. So what's happening now is behind the scenes, the digital worker is leveraging AI to understand, interpret your requirements, look at those variables, look at the flow, etc. And it's actually implemented this catalog item within ServiceNow. You can see here at the bottom, it took about 20 seconds. So what might have taken a couple of hours to do normally with a ServiceNow developer, this digital worker has implemented it in about 20 seconds. And I can go ahead and click Open in ServiceNow. Just go ahead and log in here. And you can see that it didn't sort of do this in a hacky way or anything. It actually uses MCP server. We'll talk about that behind the scenes to connect to ServiceNow and actually implement the catalog item much like a human would. So you can see here it's using a flow. It has variables and variable sets and everything else that you would normally have to set up. I can actually click Open in Workflow Studio, and you can see here what normally would take, would be a little, not necessarily difficult, but time consuming for a developer to set up in ServiceNow. It has implemented the entire catalog flow with the actions and the tasks. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is certainly it saves time, but it's also interactive. So I could say, something like, show me a preview of what this request form would look like. And the digital worker now is thinking and looking at its set of tools. And in this case, it's understood what I've asked for. And you can see here, it's responding with a simple preview of what this catalog item would look like with the field names and the forms and things like that. Okay, so if we come back here to the presentation, just to do a quick recap. So we saw how the digital worker can ingest and validate customer-specific requirements. So it can be onboarded to understand your specific requirements in your specific requirement format. That's something that's kind of unique to the digital worker. And over time, of course, the more and more you use it, the more variance it starts to understand, and it can get smarter and more capable over time. It interprets what those requirements mean and understands what needs to be done in ServiceNow, and then goes ahead and creates the forms, variables, flows, and all those scripts automatically, right? And so what might have taken you 4 to 8 hours is something that can be implemented in seconds or minutes. And again, it's not necessarily that you don't have to do anything as a ServiceNow administrator or consultant, but this frees up time for you to have more deeper engagement with the business users, ensure this is what they're looking for, and implement a lot more of these catalog items in the same amount of time. Okay, so that's a quick recap of the first example. Let's take a look at another example. In this case, something that I know everyone loves to do, which is authoring knowledge base articles. So the challenge here is it could take, again, hours or days to manually review and extract content from all of the policy documents that you have in your organization. These could be IT handbooks, they could be employee handbooks for HR, manuals, training, process guidelines, so on and so forth. It's a non-trivial exercise to be able to go through all that content and truly author high quality articles that actually help reduce the ticket volume, right? So that when people are coming to log tickets, if they have access to good articles, you can keep them up to date and hopefully defray those tickets. So normally, analyzing those documents and determining how to split the content takes time. You have to map it to the appropriate templates in ServiceNow and ultimately author the content, right? Based on not just what's in those documents, but also in the templates and understanding how to split large documents and create individual knowledge base articles appropriately, map them to the right category, and then finally go through the approval, right? And again, this could take anywhere from 1 to 5 hours, depending on how long the resource is or how large the resource is and how, what level of quality you're kind of targeting. So this is another area that we've taken up within the digital worker. So let me show you an example here. This is an employee handbook that we've downloaded from a company online called 37 Signals. It has a variety of different sections. For many of you, I'm sure this is a relatively small employee handbook compared to what you've seen, but it has information about onboarding employees, benefits and perks, setting up leave, how work is done, culture, etc. So if I were to manually, try and look through all that content, extract it, and write knowledge base articles, it might take me a fair amount of time. So it'd be much better if I could simply upload this PDF into the digital worker, and it recognizes that this is, content that is relevant for a knowledge base article, and it starts to extract the text and explore kind of what's in it and try and get a semantic understanding of what type of content is in this document. And then here again, coming back to human in the loop, it's asking for some information on which knowledge base this should go to. And so I'll go ahead and select HR general knowledge. And now it's going through all of the categories, it's going through all of the templates, thinking through any configurable quality guidelines or anything that you can give to the digital worker so that if you want, each article to be a minimum length or have certain highlights and things like that, you can define those. And you can see here, again, in about 30 or so seconds, this digital worker has generated 10 proposed knowledge articles based on these topics that it found in the PDF. And you can see here that not every article is mapped to the same category. So it's determined, for example, that the getting started content with this information that helps employees in their first few days is best mapped to the how-to template, and the other information around health, dental, and vision and paid time off is better mapped to the what is template. So it goes through, it thinks about what the content is, how it should be split up, what it should map to. And you'll also see here that we've assigned a quality score. So the first three of them have 100%. This is something that you can define within the digital worker, so that it actually scores these articles that it's written. And you can see here, it's given a low score because the article is not that long and is, missing some table or bullets. And so you can define what it means to write a high quality article and make sure that, you intercept this before you push it into ServiceNow. And so again, with interactivity, I can ask it to refine articles, add more, or go ahead and, submit these into ServiceNow to go through whatever your approval cycle is. Okay. So if I come back here, let's do a quick recap. So we showed here how we can drag and drop PDF documents. These could be policies in PDF, Word, Excel, whatever the content is. The digital worker can ingest and analyze that and figure out, how to split that content up, if relevant, into multiple articles based on the content and the templates and quality scores, and then go ahead and author and map those KB articles to the appropriate category and prep it for approval. So what might have taken you 1 to 5 hours per resource, again, is shrunk down significantly to a few minutes. And this ultimately frees up more time for you to author more articles, refine the quality, and keep them up to date more frequently because you might have much longer update cycles because it just takes you much longer to do it manually. So now you can keep that content up to date a lot more frequently, which hopefully reduces the amount of tickets that get submitted in those topics. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at a few other use cases since I think we have some time. So I'm going to show you a couple of other areas, one of which is, we're constantly looking at how to, reduce the amount of ticket volume coming into the organization, right? So when you come in on a Monday morning, you might have had a spike in tickets and you can go and ask the digital worker, hey, do some analysis on the trends. And you can see here, it's taken a look over the last few weeks of what the ticket trends are like, what the category is, what those keywords are, and what's spiking and what's declining and so forth. And this is interesting, right? This is useful, but it would be a lot more useful if I could say, and you can see here it's suggesting other items, knowledge base gap analysis, for example. So I could say, identify any KB article gaps over the past 60 days. And this analysis now is a little bit more sophisticated. We're asking the digital worker to not just go ahead and look at, what the incidents are, but to actually analyze ones that appear to not have corresponding KB articles and then go find, whether any of the articles, that exist would have helped solve this issue. This is a more longer running task, so I'm going to go ahead and show you kind of what this looks like afterwards. Bear with me. So you can see here, once it's completed, it's identified a couple of knowledge knowledge article gaps. One is in PeopleSoft CRM, where it's a recurring daily failure, and there's zero, articles for that, and similarly for SAP. And so I asked it to simply draft a knowledge base article for the SAP issue, and you can see here on the right, it actually analyzed those incidents, looked at what the issue was and what the resolution was, and drafted an article that it believes would have helped defray those tickets and maybe in the future will, avoid those coming in. So this is a more, kind of longer running conversation where we're asking the digital worker to perform some analysis and actually take some action to remediate the problem. Okay. A couple of other areas to show you. CMDB Health, I mentioned this. I'll just briefly touch on this, but again, you could use this digital worker to go ahead and analyze your CMDB. And again, based on what you've defined as, high quality CMDB health, you can see here it's provided a health score and it's identified, orphaned areas, orphaned items, duplicate items, stale items, and so forth. And again, in the spirit of interactivity, it's recommending next steps where it can take action to remediate duplicates, for example, or list, which ones are more stale than others to determine if some needs to be retired. So again, in the spirit of, interactivity, the digital worker is not only performing the analysis, that analysis is something you could potentially get in a report within ServiceNow, but actually suggesting next steps and allowing you to interactively remediate these problems. Okay. One more before we go back and I talk a little bit about the architecture. This is one that we've heard from our own internal ServiceNow implementation folks, which is that, as you've managed a ServiceNow implementation over time, you tend to get a lot of users coming in and out, and the roles are changing and so forth. And you want to be able to analyze, one or more user roles and how they're assigned to premium license subscriptions and things like that. So this is an example that we built for our own internal team. We have a small organization that manages our ServiceNow instance in Dexian. And you can see here for this particular user, it's analyzed the license distribution and shows which premium areas have been assigned to this user. You can look at it by license, by role type, and so forth. And similar to this, we also have this kind of subscription allocation summary, so you can analyze your instance and see, how you've assigned seats based on what your license availability is, and get a sense of whether you're getting, maximum use out of your ServiceNow environment, right? So, and then again here, it's suggesting some follow-up steps to see if you have over allocated or underutilized some license. That's taking a little while to load. Let me see if I can find an existing one here. Here we go. So you can see here, it's detected some compliance issues, right? And it's showing what's expiring, what maybe have been over allocated or under allocated, and you can take actions based on this to optimize your license allocation within ServiceNow. Okay. So let's come back and take a look behind the scenes here. We're starting to get some questions coming in, which is great. We typically get asked a lot about how this works behind the scenes, and very interestingly and importantly, what the security looks like. So I wanted to cover a couple of things in the architecture. On the left-hand side, top left in the gray, you see what we're calling, the onboarding or design time aspects of the digital worker. This is where, when we're onboarding this for customers, we ask for any information that they want to provide to give context to the digital worker, right? What are your best practices? Do you have knowledge base article formats or templates that you like to utilize? What are your catalog item requirements formats? Do you use Excel? What does that Excel spreadsheet look like, right? So anything that you would normally have to onboard a human if they were to come on your team, we can provide the same information to the digital worker. We use, in case those of you are interested in AI, we put this into a multimodal RAG corpus, which is ultimately vectorized and used at runtime when you ask the digital worker questions or ask it to do things, which is all the items in blue here. This digital worker has context in terms of your best practices, your requirements, formats, and all that information, so that, for example, when I uploaded that catalog item spreadsheet, it was able to interpret it, understand what it needed, and then made a call out through an MCP server that we developed, and ultimately hitting the ServiceNow APIs, preserving all the role-based access control of that particular user to be able to perform that task or retrieve information. When we retrieve information out of ServiceNow, it's only temporarily retrieved to do analysis and present the user back with the information. One of the important things is we've taken a very conservative posture in terms of what data we persist outside of ServiceNow. By default, we persist nothing outside of ServiceNow other than perhaps your chat history. And the reason we do that is because we have some customers who may have confidential information in there or other sensitive data that we don't want to persist outside of ServiceNow. And again, we authenticate these users with OAuth 2.1, so it preserves all of the role-based access controls. The other question we get asked is, hey, where is this running, right? You've built this as a web application, where is it running? So we host it securely in our AWS instance today. However, this is a Dockerized web application, and we can deploy it in any infrastructure that you choose. So we're talking with customers, for example, in the federal sector, where they need to run on FedRAMP certified infrastructure, and we can deploy the digital worker in FedRAMP certified cloud. Or in some cases, there may be customers where they want this to run completely in their own infrastructure. And so we can take this digital worker, deploy it in your own infrastructure, and even give you flexibility in terms of which large language models to use for the LLM. We're not training these models on your proprietary data. It's using it out of the box. But in some cases, your organization may have policies or requests to use very specific LLMs, in which case we can certify and make sure that the LLM of your choice works with the digital worker, and we can have it utilize that large language model. So plenty of flexibility in terms of deployment architecture, choice of LLMs, and in terms of security. We ensure that we take a very conservative posture in terms of what data is persisted, and ensuring that we have role-based access control. Okay. The other question we get asked a lot about is, hey, how does this complement ServiceNow's AI capabilities. So the demonstration I showed you today is our digital worker that essentially made API calls to configure ServiceNow without using any of ServiceNow's AI capabilities, right? However, if you have or plan to purchase Now Assist, and you're open to having the digital worker utilize Now Assist for some functions, then we can certainly take advantage, have the digital worker solve the first mile problem of interpreting your requirements and understanding your best practices, and translate that to calling out Now Assist for certain areas to help to get things done even faster than if it were just doing it on its own through the APIs. And as I mentioned earlier on, we're also exploring whether we expose some of these digital worker capabilities as Now Assist skills so you can invoke some of the digital worker um, tools and solutions from within Now Assist itself within the native ServiceNow environment. Okay. The other thing to mention is if you have AI Control Tower, we're also going to be looking at saving, audit trails on actions of everything the digital worker has done into Control Tower, and over time giving you the more ability to control and manage the digital worker through that function. But ultimately, whether we're working independently because you chose to not consume assists or what have you, or you don't have that function yet, or whether we're taking full advantage of the AI capabilities within ServiceNow, ultimately the goal is to help you get faster time to value and lower total cost of ownership by automating a lot of these more common tasks and freeing up the humans to spend more time on the high value tasks. Okay. All right. A little bit of roadmap. I get asked about this all the time. Where are you guys going from here? So one of the things to note, and you started to get a little bit of a sense of this when I showed you the interactive examples, but we're looking at having the agent do longer, more complex work streams, store more context. For example, including, let's say, a baseline implementation of a module, right? It might ask different people different questions to gather requirements or take ingest a lot more data about your requirements and actually do a full implementation of a module, getting it up to a certain baseline so that the ServiceNow, consultants, whoever you use, internal or external, can come in and take it from there, but significantly shrinking that time. The other thing we're looking at running is we support these atomic tasks and these work streams today, but you might want to schedule those. So if you like how it analyzes your CMDB health, for example, and recommends steps for remediation, you might schedule what we're calling a shift to run that every Monday at 3 a.m. so that when you come in the morning, you have a nice set of, analysis that the digital worker has teed up, and you can ask it to go ahead and take certain actions. Okay. The other thing we're doing, and one of the reasons why we built this outside of ServiceNow to start, and I'll show you kind of an example of this in a future webinar, but we can actually connect to multiple systems, not just ServiceNow. So we have customers, for example, who may be running, other ITSM tools in different departments, maybe like Atlassian Jira. And whenever somebody takes an action in Jira, they want to take a corresponding action in ServiceNow, or maybe you need to migrate tickets from a legacy ITSM application into ServiceNow on a periodic basis. Those are the types of tasks that we're going to enable the digital worker to do so that you can connect to multiple applications when you first start it and ask it to run tasks that span multiple applications to support migration, synchronization, or other things, including legacy applications that may not have easily accessible APIs. So we're using something called browser use and computer use, where it can use any browser-based application or even desktop applications to automate and control them, even if APIs do not exist. Okay. And then finally, of course, we are a build partner and we're working with ServiceNow to determine how best to expose some of these capabilities within ServiceNow, either by adding digital worker capabilities as Now Assist skills, or maybe even running a scoped app natively within ServiceNow. Okay. So that's a little bit about our roadmap. And if you set up some time with me separately, I'm happy to go through that in more detail with some of our product managers who can give you a lot more interesting, in-depth look at kind of what we're working on. So in terms of next steps, Again, thank you very much for attending this webinar. I hope you found it useful. We are more than happy to schedule private calls, especially with existing Dexian customers, to do a deep dive to understand these capabilities of the digital worker and how it works. We could work with you to determine, a low-cost POC, or for Dexian customers, a zero-cost POC to prove out that we can significantly reduce the time that you may be spending today with either internal folks or consultants. A lot of our customers are spending significant amount of money doing some of these maintenance tasks with consultants. We're happy to talk to you about doing a POC to show how we can significantly shrink. And when I say significant, I'm talking about reducing the cost of that work by 50% or more. That's our goal. And then based on the proof of that, POC, we would then expand and look to a phased approach to further find areas of improvement for you. Okay, so my information is here. If you're watching the recording, feel free to reach out. You guys will get my information. And we're just at 12:40, which was perfect timing. I'm going to pause here and address some of the questions that are coming in. But in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to me and connect on LinkedIn or send me an email. And if you're a Dexian customer, go through your rep and we'd be happy to facilitate a call. I look forward to speaking with you live at some point. Okay. So again, just to remind people, you can ask questions through the Zoom Q&A panel, and you can send them to me privately or openly, and I'm going to kind of walk through it. So we have several questions. I'm going to spend a few minutes addressing these. So let's see, this first one, this is a bit of a technical one. Views of closed ink with an attached KA. However, based on the details within the ticket, the attached KA is incorrect. Will the system be able to find those and just more correct knowledge and or recommend the development of correct knowledge? Okay, I think this is a question about, if there's an incident that's been closed and there's an associated knowledge article with that incident, can the digital worker actually go through those closed incidents and do some analysis and be able to suggest better or more correct knowledge articles? The answer is absolutely it can. Because LLMs, large language models, are actually good at understanding context and semantics and can look at a lot of data, we can absolutely build a task that has the digital worker go through either historically or even on a sort of real-time basis, right? Or near real-time basis as incidents are closed, have it go look at it and do some analysis immediately, and do things like recommend better knowledge articles that might have resolved that ticket or automatically recommend an article, things like that. Absolutely. Next question: does my company's data need to be shared outside of ServiceNow for digital worker to work? If no, if so, how do you guarantee data security integrity? Hopefully, I addressed that earlier, but the answer is no. You do not have to share data outside of ServiceNow. The digital worker temporarily looks at the data using the ServiceNow API, presents it back to you, and then once the session's ended, that data is gone. It resides back in ServiceNow. Now, we want to make this an option because the other question that we often get asked is, hey, can the digital worker remember, right, the context and history of everything I've done with it? So if I've been using the digital worker for several months, it's truly a companion. It can remind me, hey, Rich, you asked me that question 6 months ago or whatever, and I did A, B, and C. So we'll make that an option on how much history you want to preserve, right, and how much of the data you want to preserve within the digital worker. And again, we can go through the security reviews and ensure that your security folks are comfortable with that. Or we can even deploy the digital worker and that data persistence in your own infrastructure to support your security needs. Okay. Next question is related to that, which is how does it handle confidential information such as an HR instance? So again, we're not persisting any information outside of ServiceNow. It's simply like a human would looking at ServiceNow and the data that's in there and giving you information about it. Once you shut the digital worker down, that information is no longer available to it. If you'd want to have it look at it again, it'll have to reconnect to ServiceNow and look at that information again. So no confidential data is exported. And remember, you are logging into the digital worker using your same credentials that you'd use in ServiceNow. So you only have access to view and perform actions based on what the ServiceNow administrator has set up for you within ServiceNow. Okay. What happens to the data if the client decides to part ways from this service a few years from now? Great question. We'll give you the ability to, export this information. Again, we're not saving by default a lot of data there, so you'll be exporting things like your chats or what have you. But we're not interested in owning your data. You own your data. It'll be written as such in any, statement of work or license agreements. This is simply assistant to help you guys get your job done sooner. Hopefully, it does it so well that you'll use it for many, many years. And as developers come and go in your organization, the digital worker is that one constant that remembers everything that's been done. Okay. Next question. Is the digital worker used primarily by ServiceNow admins versus ticket owners? This is a great question. We are seeing from ServiceNow a push for AI investments, not just within ServiceNow, but as you guys know, they acquired MoveWorks and I think renamed it to EmployeeWorks. A lot of the investment that ServiceNow is making is on what we call runtime support of ServiceNow, meaning helping more of the ticket workers or end users. Now, we can absolutely have the digital worker do that, but we're trying to avoid overlapping with ServiceNow work. So at least for now, we have focused primarily on the administrative and development work that goes into implementing ServiceNow, because that tends to be where some of the gaps are with respect to all the AI capabilities in the market. So at the moment, we are primarily focusing on reducing the time and cost of implementing and maintaining and administering ServiceNow, not necessarily focusing on the end user like the ticket fulfillers and workers. That said, if there is a gap that you see with what ServiceNow provides and you'd like the digital worker to be assistive to the end users, that's certainly something we can look at. But for example, in HR, the digital worker is less about employee-facing assistant to answer questions about HR help and more about helping someone who's, let's say, trying to build a really cool, portal, HR portal for HRSD and is struggling with widgets and building out, those capabilities. We will focus more on the latter than the former. So hopefully that answers that question. All right. One last one that's come in is, cost and license. So for this one, that's a longer discussion. And the reason it's longer discussion is at the moment, we are utilizing the digital worker to provide services to our customers at a lower cost than some of the other ServiceNow consultants. So at the moment, we're using the digital worker for many of our customers who have engaged Bytemethod and Dexian to provide ServiceNow work for them. In the future, we will license the digital worker to customers and potentially other partners as well. And from a licensing perspective, we're trying to keep it very simple. So we will charge, a monthly or annual subscription to the digital worker to perform any tasks. We're not going to say you're limited to certain tasks, but any tasks that we support or build for you is covered under that license. And it'll be priced at, let's say, half the cost of a low-cost entry-level ServiceNow developer offshore, right? So let's say that's 50K. We might charge 25K per year, 2,000 per month, or something like that to utilize the digital worker up to a certain amount of tasks per month, right? And those correspond roughly to token consumption in LLMs, but you'll effectively be able to use the digital worker for as many users as you want, for any task as you want, up to a certain capacity. And if you hit that capacity, you're probably getting great value out of it, and you'd be open to purchasing another digital worker to support your needs. But please feel free to reach out, and we'll answer those questions in a lot more specificity. And really appreciate everyone who joined. Oh, I have one more question that came in. We're trying to embrace CSDM. Are there tools around trying to build meaningful service hierarchy? Yes, we are looking at, that's one area we're looking at as well. Candidly, we're opportunistic because right now we support around 100 different atomic tasks, and we're looking at how to build those longer running work streams. So if you're interested in something, view this more as not whether we currently support it, but what would you like us to have the digital worker do? So if there's ways around building, say, service hierarchy and things like that that you think could be automated, we're happy to have that conversation. We will invest in the R&D to build that out and do a POC with you to prove that it's saving you time. Okay. Another question, do you have experience with the IRM module within ServiceNow, and can it manage that specific work? We do have experience as a company that's implemented IRM. I need to get back to you and check whether we've actually built some ServiceNow tasks around that. So I know that's an anonymous one. Please reach out to me on email or LinkedIn, and I'll answer that question for you with more specificity. But again, there's no limit to what we can do, as provided there's an API for it. So it can pretty much do any tasks that's available to be managed within ServiceNow through an API, or in some cases, even without an API, we have ways to do that. So the short answer to any of those questions is the digital worker can pretty much do anything that you do in ServiceNow today. It's just a matter of where we have it in the roadmap, and we're happy to work with you to prioritize, build it out, and prove it to you. Okay. So we're at 12:50. I want to give people some time back. Thank you very much for attending. Thanks to everyone for your questions. To those of you who are on the recording, thank you for watching this afterwards. Please keep an eye out for more webinars for us on this topic. We're going to have guest speakers talk about, people even within our own organization who've leveraged this to support different ServiceNow needs. And yeah, look forward to speaking with you and hopefully seeing you soon. Thanks, everyone.